Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show from the STMM Digital Studio. I really enjoyed talking to my friend Paul Gallo. Man, we're so lucky to have him in this company. And, we don't always agree on the issues, but what's awesome about it is that we are intellectually honest about how we feel about things. And because of that, we have great conversations, and the back and forth between us is honest. And as we pointed out, it's not going through a bunch of filters. It's how we feel about it. And I love the guy for that reason. Anyway, let's shift gears and move over to my friend, the Secretary of State, Michael Watson, coming out of, man, this was a rough Republican primary, man. I know as a member of the Republican Party and someone who leads in the party, you got to be happy that messy stuff is behind us.
I am, Ricky, and it was a bruiser, as you all know. And one of the things we always look at is turnout, and I really expect the turnout to be much better because of the absentee numbers we saw going into it. But we were about just under 30%, and those are the worst numbers in a primary since about 2007 for a statewide election. So we got some work to do.
Yeah, and you saw, let's look at the lieutenant governor's race for a second. You see the third candidate got a little bit more votes than people expected. I think that was a protest vote. And others just got so turned off by it. Either they just got turned off by it or they didn't really care. They just didn't care. And it's really unfortunate, to be honest with you, because as you and I both know, in this state, constitutionally, the governor is actually a weak position. Lieutenant governor is one of the most important positions in the state. And this was a hugely important debate that was taking place. And I would have really expected more people to be engaged in it. But I think it's a little bit people got worn out, and the other is they just didn't care, which is unfortunate. But you see this too often in elections, don't you?
You do, and really the toxicity in politics just has so many people turning away, and they don't want to participate in something that's so ugly and gross, and especially when you see these TV commercials come up and these negative mailers. And I get hitting back when you have to hit back, but let's stick to the facts and keep the high ground as often as we can.
Yeah, I talked to Delbert about that. I have a strong belief in democracy in America and Mississippi by extension, but I do think that money in politics, if you don't have really, really good laws surrounding them, creating accountability, not just in who gave the money, but in what they're saying. Because in this case, with the lieutenant governor's race, you had this tremendous amount of dark money pouring into this state. We didn't know where it was coming from. We didn't know what their agenda is. They weren't accountable for the lies they were telling us. And that just made me sick at my stomach to watch it. And it's driving wedges in the state of Mississippi, especially in social media where people were engaged to not like each other. People who loved each other now didn't like each other. It's just unfortunate, man. I think one of the most important things you guys can do as leaders of the Republican Party now is find healing in all of this.
Yeah, it's tough. And we saw even after the race was over, folks still hurling names and mad at each other. And that's an unfortunate part of this. And I'll tell you, one of the things you mentioned there, campaign finance reform, I was just reviewing this morning. We've got 22 different pieces of reform we think could be helpful that we've been working on. And as you know, this was our first statewide race to oversee the election process. And I remember back in 19 when I ran, we had some outside PAC dollars come in through another PAC into the campaign running against me. And so we saw a little bit then, but now being able to see a full cycle and understand what's out there, we've got some really good suggestions. I was on the phone this morning with the lieutenant governor talking about campaign finance reform. So we're going to send him over our suggestions. They've got some issues they want to tackle. So we'll work together to get that done. But you're exactly right, making sure that Mississippians understand from where is this money coming, who's trying to influence our elections, and what exactly are these people about?
Yeah, do you have any idea? I mean, who were they and what did they want?
Good question. We saw some of the money, I think, out of Virginia, D.C. I know there was a Delaware-based company. A lot of that is PAC to PAC, and that's how they wash it to try to make sure that you can't find it. So we've got that addressed in some of our points. But again, it's unfortunate, especially when it comes in last minute like that, and you just got to sustain those blows with a couple of days to go before elections, and you can't respond. So that's really hard.
And it made it tough for you to be, you have tremendous responsibilities for elections in Mississippi. I know you were concerned about it. The Attorney General didn't seem to really have a role. Maybe there's something more you could do. But you don't have enough time. You don't have enough time to act. But, buddy, it's two things, though. It's where the money is coming from, and it's the message in the ads, and there's just no accountability, and no election should be in a scenario where you can't follow the money, and you can't have some accountability around the message. That's not good. And in this particular case, thank God it didn't turn the election. Thank God in the case where the money poured in on your campaign, it didn't turn your election. But it's scary. It's scary. I think, first of all, it's scary that something I believe would have happened that was not good for our state. But on top of that, the damage it's doing inside our state, having neighbors turn against one another, it's not good, man. We live in too much of a divided world already without having to worry about that.
Again, the toxicity of it's gross. And I was actually this week, we had our first in-person summit for this class of our ambassadors and 67 high school seniors. And we started talking through some of these issues. What are the things that divide us? Why are people not wanting to come to Mississippi? How do we dig into that? And having those hard conversations with our youth is really just inspiring to me to see where they are and how we can fix those things for them to have a bright future here. But you see it in politics, and it's unfortunate. And we talked a lot about the toxicity and how ugly that race got. So we got to do better.
Hey, is there more that can be done now in retrospect? I know that we're going to consider a large myriad of laws, and thank goodness we're going to do that. I'm confident something good will happen from all of that. But still, some of the laws were broken, most likely, weren't they? I mean, so what do we do about that?
Listen, I'll tell you, we've sent probably 10 or 11 different issues over to the AG's office, and this is the first one that I've seen where they've come out and said, we're going to investigate it. So unfortunately, we're having a little bit of a hard time getting, and this is how it works. You either have to have the attorney general or the local district attorney to prosecute these crimes. So when we send them out, that's the end of the road for us. We can't do anything else. We've got to have help prosecuting those crimes. And when you don't do so, it just gives the green light. Hey, go ahead and break the laws because they're not going to be enforced. So we have laws on the book now that should be enforced, but we're going to, again, look at this new package coming up in the legislature next year.
So look, I'm not trying to stir the pot or anything like that, but whether it be this issue that we're just now talking about or the Tidelands issue, sure. Is there something missing in the laws, or is there a rub that's developing between your office and the AG's office? What's your thinking right now?
So on Tidelands, that really started the rub, and as you mentioned, that it kind of started early on when we were working with DMR. As the process goes, folks have to have a lease with the Secretary of State's office for the public trust Tidelands. Then they also have to get a permit from DMR if they want to build a bulkhead or a pier or do other kind of construction pieces on that land. Well, DMR's position is we can issue that permit, and then we tell them, hey, but make sure you go to the Secretary of State's office for this lease. Well, of course, they don't do that. And the AG's office basically said, well, we don't think that's DMR's job to enforce that either. My position was, look, we're two state agencies. Why can we not work together on this? You have a lease, then you get your permit. You have to have control of the land to go do some construction on it. The AG took the DMR side, and that's fine. So then I said, all right, if that's the case, then we've got a bunch of these leases out there where these folks aren't getting those leases, but they've gotten permits to do work on the land. So AG, why don't you help me enforce this law to make sure that they do have leases after you're saying they don't have to have them to get a permit? Well, I called, I emailed, I texted, I saw her in public. We've got to sit down and get this working. Eventually, we had a few conversations with the chief of staff, but again, nothing happened. Finally, after about a couple of years, last month, I believe it was, we finally got the green light to hire outside counsel. In my opinion, the state shouldn't be spending money on outside counsel when the attorney general could help us enforce the law as it is written. And that's really where the rub started at the AG's office. But look, I like Lynn personally. I just wish we could get a little more help from the AG's office.
So do you have any idea? I'll invite her and we can talk about this with her. But is it political? What are just a disagreement with the way the law is currently? I mean, the law is the law, right? I mean.
If you are constructing or doing anything for commercial purpose on public trust Tidelands, you've got to have a lease, period. So it's very clear. And if you don't have a lease and you're commercially profiting from that land, there's a problem. That's the law, period. And so I think part of it is, Ricky, and I'm from the coast. Let me remind you of that. So it's not fun for me to go to these business owners and say, hey, you're going to have to enter a lease because that's the law. That's not popular. It's not fun, but it's the law. So part of me thinks maybe that is a piece of it. Some folks don't want to ruffle feathers, and I don't want to ruffle feathers either. But if it's the law, then we've got to follow it, and whatever the consequences are, so be it.
So when Mayor Fofo Gilich was on the show last week, he said that he's trying to look at it from a practical point of view. That he's just from a commonsensical point of view, it doesn't make sense to him what's happening. And so when we get on the other side, we'll talk a little bit more about, has something changed? It's saying the past 10 or 15, 20 years, what's changed that makes it not comprehensible anymore from just a commonsensical point of view? We'll continue our conversation with Secretary of State Michael Watson when we get on the other side. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show from the STMM Digital Studio. I'm with my friend Michael Watson, the Secretary of State. And when we went to break, we were sort of venturing off into this discussion about tidelands. So let me further frame it real quick, and then you can pick it up from there. But listen, Fofo's argument was what I said before we went to break, that he wants it to make sense. But at the core of his argument really isn't an issue with you, and the way I read it, it's really an issue with the legislature, and that is that it is true Biloxi is generating the majority of the tidelands revenue from the casinos and commercial operations that are taking place over tidelands. But they're not seeing enough of that money coming back to the city, and it just aggravates him to no end that he's not seeing the benefit of the revenue that he's helping to develop. But that's not your problem, right?
That's correct. And at the end of the day, I think you've drilled it. It's about money. And he said on the show himself, the 80-something%, I think it's probably a little north of 80, that Biloxi generates is then split across the entire coast. If it weren't for that, I don't think you'd see this spat. And one of the other things that he mentioned, again, that I want to make sure people understood, the Bay St. Louis case, the Murphy case, those dollars came out of the Capital Expense Fund, not Public Trust Tidelands dollars. So I want to be very clear on that. So it's also important to know the facts when we got to get here and understand, hey, let's make the arguments, but let's be factual about it. Let's don't portray something that's not true to get the public thinking one way or the other when the facts aren't correctly put out there.
Look, as a former CEO, I can't help it. I always put my problem-solving hat on in a situation like this. So if I weren't on the air and I was being a mediator, what I would say is let's look at this in two different ways. First of all, the law says this about tidelands, and DMR and the AG, the City of Biloxi, City of Gulfport, whoever, and the Secretary of State's office ought to be aligned around that. It's very clear that if you have a commercial operation and you're building something over the water, you need a tidelands lease, and that's where we are. And then over here, if you've got issues about how the money is distributed, then that's a legislative issue, and let's go solve that. But what we're doing is we're conflating the two. Because we're not getting the money back over here, we're saying we're not going to reach an agreement to the situation over here. And then you get politics involved and sort of this some people say what is anti-coast. Well, nothing has changed. The Secretary of State's role as it relates to Thailand has not changed a bit. There's been no new laws related to any of this recently. So I don't understand what the legal arguments about it are, because at the end of the day, what we've got now, Michael, is, man, the legal costs are just skyrocketing for everybody. Why are we doing this? Why can't we sit down and just resolve this?
That's the great question. And I know he also mentioned that I won't come off of my position. Well, my position is what the law says, and I can't come off of that position. So back to the point there about the money, when this was created way back when, let's remember, this was Senator Tommy Galat from Biloxi, who got all the coast on board and said, hey, if all of y'all will support this, we'll spend the money across the entire coast, this one coast idea. So let's get on the same page and let's support this. That's what the law is. Now, you want to change that? Get the legislature back together and change the law. So that is, you succinctly put what the issue is. Money is bleeding over into the legal side of it, and they're conflating the issues when you just don't have to. And look, sometimes we get in these discussions about who needs a tidelands lease and who doesn't. There's been a couple of cases where I've wound up negotiating against myself to lower the lease rate because I'm from the coast. I want to see the coast do well. And I think people need to remember that. I'm from Jackson County. This is my home, so I want the coast to do well. So, of course, I'm going to be on the side of the coast in this issue.
And by the way, the tidelands revenue, incidentally, has gone to fund so many important projects for coastal Mississippi. I mean, it's been, that money has been transformative, and piers and all the other improvements that have been made, helping us get back after storms. And gosh, the list is long, man. I mean, it's been really good for the coast. And I understand Tommy Gallat would not have been able to get that bill passed without the support of the other jurisdictions here along coastal Mississippi. I get that. And I don't know how to unravel that now. I really don't.
Well, on that point, I think it's really important to really spend a couple seconds on that. Thailand's dollars, as you mentioned there, are spent across the entire coast. So should Biloxi get up there and change the legislation, that's going to hurt Jackson County. It's going to hurt Hancock County. It's going to hurt Gulfport, Ocean Springs. I could go down the list. You understand the point here. It also is going to hurt DMR because they use a percentage of those dollars to pull down federal funds to continue their operations. So this is an entire coast issue that we need here, those dollars on the coast. And if it continues to be blown out of proportion and it gets uglier than it should, you're going to see some of these legislators in other parts of the state that say, hey, if the coast can't get it together, you know what? I'd like that $10 or $11 million to be spread around the rest of the state.
Well, like when the BP money came,
that's exactly right.
Gosh, I mean, it drove me crazy that we only get a percentage of that money, that we had to share any of that with it, because it's about economic prosperity and rebuilding sort of an economic base for coastal Mississippi and doing transformative projects. And that's what happened. That's just what happened. And then on top of that, you don't have a board of trustees that can decide like you have with the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund. You got to send it back up to the legislature and let all those politics get involved in it. So anytime that happens, boy, you better not hope for that outcome, because it's going to be something less than what we have today. There's no question about it. Anyway, we're out of time, Michael, but we will continue this conversation. I hope you guys can all get on the same page about this and quit spending all this money on legal expenses. It's not good for the state. It's not good for the city.
It's not, Ricky, and you make a great point. The most important piece to remember there is I am from the coast. You got a Secretary of State who wants to see the coast do well. So I'm on the coast side on this issue.
This has been Secretary of State Michael Watson. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.